So I did my paper on animal testing, and this is why I think animal testing should be banned. Death is what will come of animals that are inhumanely treated. They feel pain and emotions just like we do. They live a stressful life in a small cage with many other animals around them. There are other ways to test products and medicine that don't involve harming anyone. Animal testing is expensive, wasteful, and cruel. It's time to evolve and make animal testing a thing of the past. Animals need a lot of space. They are meant to roam and be free. Wild animals have a whole forest or jungle to explore, and pets have a whole backyard to explore. Animals that are subject to testing don't get the luxury of a jungle or forest, or even a backyard. They live in a cage that is as big as them with very little room to move. Other animals are in the same room with the same living conditions. Most animals are in pain due to the inhumane testing they are going through. Quote, they are force-fed laundry detergents, pesticides, and industrial chemicals to the point of continuous vomiting and death. They are injected with lethal pathogens such as salmonella or rabies. They have artificial sweeteners injected into their vein that causes dogs to be killed. Holes are drilled into their skulls so that viruses can be injected into their brain. Quote, this cruel treatment causes lots of stress for animals. Stress is a big factor in why animal testing is unreliable. Animals are not used to captivity. In a laboratory, there is no windows, only artificial lighting. There is no room to move around, only tons of animals in small cages. The lab is very noisy, not only because of all the animals, but because of humans too. Laboratories are not what an animal is used to. This causes distress and abnormal behaviors in animals. For example, stressed rats develop chronic inflammatory conditions and intestinal leakage just from being stressed. Living in constant fear sounds miserable. Stress is something we have all experienced, but not to this degree. Quote, keeping animals in unnatural, restricted environments, preventing natural behaviors, and subjecting them to invasive, often uncomfortable and painful experiments causes them substantial stress, end quote. Stress is a natural thing in life, but it is supposed to resolve. So the fact that these animals have unrelenting stress, this causes a change in natural behavior. Animals are used for a wide variety of testing, from the safety of cosmetics, personal care, household products, chemicals, and medical devices. Testing is very stressful for animals, not only because of tiny living conditions, but also because they are in pain. During testing, animals experience lots of different stuff. US laws allow animals to be burned, shocked, poisoned, isolated, starved, drowned, and brain damaged. This causes lots of pain. Most people or animals in this type of pain would take medicine, yet these animals do not get to take medicine to help them with the pain. Quote, animals suffer from vomiting, diarrhea, paralysis, convulsion, and internal bleeding. Since death is the required endpoint, dying animals are not put out of their misery by anesthesia, end quote. Animals and humans feel pain like we do. They have emotions as well. But when it comes to animal testing, genetics and thinking skills are very different. Animal testing is not always correct due to the fact that people and animals are very different. For example, something that is deadly to a monkey might have no effect on a bird. Another factor that causes false information is stress. Quote, biological makeup of humans differ in significant ways from other animals. That's the same across the other members of the animal kingdom, end quote. Not only are animals just genetically different, but they live totally different lifestyles. Wild animals roam and do as they please. Domestic animals live a pretty normal, relaxed lifestyle, and animals that go through testing live a more stressful lifestyle. Animals in lab experience many different feelings. Some of those feelings make them physically ill. Quote, varied and powerful biological mechanisms are involved, impacting immune function, nerve and cardiovascular systems, and many more, hardly ideal when attempting to obtain good quality and human relevant data, end quote. There are many alternatives to animal testing, such as vitro testing, computer modeling, human volunteers, human tissue. These are better because they don't waste time, money, and material. Vitro testing uses human cells, not animal cells. This is a cruelty-free way to test products on human cells and watch how they react through the microscope. Computer modeling is another cruelty-free way to test products. It works by allowing scientists to see how an organ or the whole body would react to the products. Computer modeling has been around since 1960 and is an extremely effective way to experiment. Having human volunteers is also very helpful because we don't want to cure cancer for rats, we want to cure cancer for humans. So it is much more helpful to experiment with human subjects. Using human tissues is another way to test products. It allows scientists to see the many groups of cells and how they would react to the chemical. Quote, crude skin allergy tests in guinea pigs only predict 72% of the time, but a combination of chemistry and cell-based alternative methods has been shown to accurately predict human reactions 90% of the time, end quote. The harm that is committed against innocent animals should not be minimized because they aren't, quote, human. They have feelings and emotions just like we do. It is time to evolve and adapt to one of these new testing methods. Stop wasting our resources and use our new technology to make a change.
Defunding the police, how equitable reallocation of funding and a reimagining of the current policing system can lead to positive change. Defunding the police and increased continuation of police reform will lead to positive change and is the first step in achieving an equitable country. Deferring funding to prioritizing social services, investing in communities, and deconstructing police militarization will lay the foundation for rehabilitation rather than criminalization. In the wake of years of police brutality, violence, and corruption, there has been a growing cry around the nation to defund the police. At face value, this demand seems rather extreme, often being opposed by the claim that no society could function without some kind of police force. And while that is certainly true, this shows a misunderstanding of what the movement to defund the police is truly about. Many people believe that police are synonymous with public safety, and although they often do help keep the public safe, it is not always true, so it can be difficult to imagine any other option. However, when looked at more closely, defunding the police simply refers to reallocating excess police funding to non-police aspects of public safety, improving support for communities, and establishing restorative methods of criminal reform and crime prevention. One of the largest points in support of defunding the police is the fact that police departments in the United States are simply overfunded in relation to overall budgets of cities, towns, and other program needs. In almost every United States city, police funding accounts for the largest share of the yearly budget. And according to a statistic from the American Friends Service Committee, the United States collectively spends $100 billion on policing annually. While much of this budget goes towards salaries and essential police programs, there is a portion which can certainly be considered excess and in turn diverts substantial amounts of money away from other essential community programs. ACLU Policing Policy Advisor Paige Fernandez writes in an article for the ACLU, quote, in New York City, the government spends almost $6 billion on policing, which is more than it does on the Department of Health, Homeless Services, Housing Prevention and Development, and Youth and Community Development combined, end quote. Defunding the police does not simply refer to entirely cutting police funding, but is rather simply suggesting that cities' funding be spread in a more equitable manner throughout community programs rather than channeling funding into massive policing budgets, which ultimately do not keep us safe as they should or benefit communities as they should. Not only is the evidence there supporting this, but statistics show that the majority of the American people agree. According to a study from the New York Times, only 56% of white adults say that they were confident in police, compared to only 19% of black adults saying the same. The reality is that having a larger police presence simply does not keep us safe, which time has thoroughly proven. or does not keep us more safe, I'm sorry. A study using 60 years of data found that increased police funding did not show a decrease in crime, and simply pushing more police into an area showed the same results, no decrease. University of Maryland sociology professor Rashawn Ray states this very well when he says, quote, "Throwing more police onto the street to solve a structural problem is one of the reasons why people are protesting in the streets. Defunding the police, reallocating funding away from police to reduce crime, reallocating funding away from police departments to other sectors of government may be more beneficial for reducing crime and police violence," end quote. Thinking about an equitable division of funding is critical when talking about diverting and reshaping police budgets, as most of the issues in our communities are best suited to be handled by non-police responders. While police can be an effective way to deal with violent crime, many of the situations where a first responder is needed would be much better handled by a responder trained to de-escalate a situation in a non-violent manner in a way that police training doesn't always cover, such as a social worker. In an article by Amy Goodman and Dennis Moynihan for Democracy Now!, Jeremiah Ellison, a member of the Minneapolis City Council, is interviewed. Ellison, who has been at the forefront of the city's efforts to defund their police department, says, "We did a study last year of 911 calls, and we realized that one of the top calls that police make are for what we call emotionally disturbed persons or mental health calls, ... Do we need a gun present at a call like that? Question mark. I think the answer is no," end quote. So many calls to which police respond concern individuals going through mental health crises, situations which police are simply not trained for to the extent that other workers are. Recently, 19-year-old Christian Hall was shot and killed by 2 police officers while undergoing a mental health episode on an overpass in Pennsylvania. Hall was possibly contemplating suicide, and although he was entirely unarmed, police still shot and killed him. This would not have happened if a mental health professional who was properly trained to de-escalate someone in Christian's position had responded to the scene. If so much of a city's budget goes to policing, it takes away available funding for so many community support programs, including training and funding for responders that are desperately needed for situations like Christian's. Mary Zirkle, a writer for the American Friends Service Committee, states, quote, "Policing diverts billions of dollars from school, healthcare, and other vital programs that need more funding to strengthen our communities and support shared well-being," end quote. If funding were allocated in a more equitable way, these essential programs could have the funding needed to operate at maximum strength, giving the opportunity for so many incidents to be dealt with correctly and safely by professionals trained in more specific issues than police. Consequently, the overall benefit to public safety would be immense. Keeping our community safe is more than using violent force to protect people from violent crimes, and should preserve the health and personal safety of individuals while working to strengthen community infrastructure. If we were to equitably divide funding among all aspects of public well-being, we could continue to build the foundations for an effective way to deal with crime in a preventative and restorative manner. While the movement to defund the police has gained significant traction surrounding incidents in recent years, tensions between police and BIPOC, Black, Indigenous, and people of color community are nothing new. There have been racially motivated incidents of violence and extreme prejudice between police and BIPOC people ever since policing's origins. And to this day, hundreds of innocent lives are taken by police each year as we continue to see displays of excessive force and corruption amongst police. There are 2 main routes that branch into the United States' current policing system, both of which have extremely racist origins and have led to a system that perpetuates years of systemic racism. The first route is slave patrols. Originating in South Carolina in the 1700s, slave patrols were groups of white volunteers tasked with catching runaway slaves and enforcing the many other racist laws tied to slavery. Members of slave patrols would forcibly enter people's homes without warrant on suspicion that they were harboring runaway slaves, would hunt down escapees, and often torture them upon their capture. These programs were government funded and therefore can be considered one of the earliest precursors to modern policing. After emancipation, these patrols moved to enforcing newly enacted Jim Crow laws. The second main precedent to modern policing systems were, quote, centralized municipal police departments that began to form in the early 19th century, beginning in Boston and soon popping up in New York City, Albany, Chicago, Philadelphia, and elsewhere. The first police forces were overwhelmingly white, male, and more focused on responding to disorder than crime, end quote. That's a quote from Mary Hassett Walker from an article titled "The Racist Roots of American Policing from Slave Patrols to Traffic Stops." At this time, these earliest police forces were much more focused on controlling disorder than they were with actual crime, and it just so happened that most of this disorder took place in poor minority communities. The police sent to these communities had little to no supervision, and at this time, there were almost no standards for hiring police officers and virtually no training. Naturally, this led to extreme corruption and brutal violence, laying the groundwork for issues still present today. Today, we see multitudes of corruption within police forces, from shutting off required body cameras to brutal use of excessive force. When thinking about defunding police and policing, we must face its racist history and think about reworking the still deeply flawed system. While many may argue that racism in policing is a thing of the past and that times have changed, there is extensive evidence that proves otherwise. While the use of racist regulations has been illegal at a state and federal level since 1968, there are still countless displays of racism in policing, and people of color are still significantly more likely to be killed by police than white people. According to a statistic from the Washington Post, 992 people died at the hands of police in 2018, and of that group, 23% were Black, despite Black people only making up approximately 12% of the country's population. In a staggering comparison, 53% of those killed by police were white, but white people make up 62% of the population. The latter gives contrast to just how out of balance these death rates are. According to the Stanford Open Police Project, Black drivers are significantly more likely to be pulled over than white drivers, and the study also shows that the percentage of Black drivers getting pulled over drops significantly after dark, when it is harder to identify a person's race from outside the vehicle. Today, quote, 1 in 1,000 Black people are statistically predicted to die at the hands of the police, end quote. Over the years, we have seen some progress in policing. There is a bit more police training around the use of appropriate force, and more officers in training are taking courses like diversity and criminal justice, which will hopefully lead to progress in the next generation of officers. However, police training time and time again still proves to be inadequate, shown by the continuous displays of corruption, brutality, and racism. In the United States, it takes significantly more hours of training to become a barber than it does to obtain a police badge. It is time to defund police and work to fix this broken system while raising up our communities. Through equitable reallocation of funding, demilitarization of police, and increasing resources invested in communities, we continue to progress towards effective public safety.